disrespect, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. But something about tonight hit differently. Maybe it was the way the hostess had hesitated, the way the manager's smirk barely masked his intent, or the fact that, even after all these years, he was still being met with the same old barriers, just dressed up in a more refined package. What happened to Snoop Dogg that night will leave you speechless. What started as a simple evening of celebration took an unexpected turn that no one saw coming. Stay tuned until the end to uncover the full story, and don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. The warm Los Angeles evening hummed with energy as Snoop Dogg leaned back in the plush leather seat of his Cadillac Escalade. The city's rhythm pulsed in the background, a perfect soundtrack to what should have been a night of triumph. A new album receiving glowing reviews, a tight-knit crew ready to celebrate, and a reservation at one of the most exclusive restaurants in town, everything was set for an unforgettable night. His phone buzzed. A message from his longtime manager and friend, Jason. "Jason, we're outside the restaurant, man. Can't wait to check out this spot you picked." Snoop chuckled and typed back, "Hold tight, I'm pulling up now." His crew had been with him through it all, the grueling late-night studio sessions, the endless tours, the highs and lows of the industry. Tonight was about unwinding, showing appreciation, and reconnecting. As he pulled up to the sleek entrance of Eminence Dining, the place radiated exclusivity. Minimalist decor, polished glass, a quiet sophistication that practically whispered VIP only. Snoop stepped out, adjusting his tailored suit, and spotted Jason, Tina, and a couple of younger protégés from his label waiting by the entrance. "Snoop Dogg in the building." Jason called out, pulling him into a firm handshake that turned into a hug. Laughter, inside jokes, and easy banter filled the air as they made their way to the grand double doors. Inside, the ambience was pure luxury. Chandeliers casting warm light over mahogany tables, the subtle hum of jazz weaving through the air, and waitstaff moving with the kind of effortless grace that only came with high-end establishments. Snoop had seen luxury before, but even he had to admit, this place had a certain weight to it. Reaching the hostess stand, he flashed his signature grin. "Reservation for Dogg, party of 6. The hostess, a young woman with a sleek ponytail and the kind of detached politeness that came with working at a place like this, glanced at her screen. Her expression flickered, just for a second, before she quickly straightened. "One moment, sir." Tina leaned in, whispering, "She just looked at us like we walked in off the street." Snoop shrugged, keeping his cool. "Probably just checking. You know how these spots are." Minutes passed. The hostess returned, her demeanor noticeably colder. "I'm sorry, Mr. Dogg, but there's been an error with your reservation. We don't have a table available tonight." The mood shifted instantly. Jason frowned, crossing his arms. "That can't be right. We called ahead. Confirmed it this morning." The hostess avoided his gaze. "Unfortunately, we are fully booked this evening. I apologize for the inconvenience." Tina stepped forward, frustration clear in her voice. "Fully booked? We just walked by open tables. What's really going on?" The hostess's lips tightened into a practiced smile. "Those tables are reserved for other guests." The air grew thick. Snoop kept his composure, but beneath his calm exterior, something stirred. He'd seen this before. "Look, mistakes happen. But we had this booked for weeks. Can you check again?" Before she could respond, a man in a sharply tailored suit appeared from the back. His confident stride, his knowing smirk, he wasn't just staff. He was in charge. "Is there an issue here?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew the answer. Snoop turned to face him. "Yeah. Apparently, our reservation disappeared." "Mind explaining how that happened?" The man's smile was cold. "Mr. Dogg, I apologize for any confusion, but we must adhere to our reservation policy. Tonight, we are at capacity." Jason's voice rose. "You're seriously turning away Snoop Dogg? You know who this man is?" The manager's expression didn't waver. We treat all our guests equally here, sir. A hush fell over the restaurant as murmurs spread. People began to recognize Snoop, whispers rippling through the space. The humiliation burned hotter. This wasn't a mistake. This was something deeper. Uglier. Snoop exhaled slowly, his voice steady. "Let's go." Tina started to protest. "Snoop." I said, "Let's go." The mood was shattered. What was supposed to be a night of celebration had turned into something else entirely. As they stepped back out into the city's glow, the neon lights seemed colder, the energy harsher. Snoop climbed into the car, gripping the steering wheel, jaw tight. He'd faced plenty of challenges in his life, but this felt personal. This wasn't just about a table. It was about a message. Silence filled the car until Tina finally broke it. "This isn't right. We can't just let them get away with this." Snoop nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Oh, we won't. Trust me, we won't." As the Escalade pulled away, the restaurant's polished facade faded in the rearview mirror. But the night wasn't over. Not by a long shot. What happened next? Well, let's just say, Eminence Dining wasn't ready for the storm that was coming. Be a statement, a movement, a celebration of black excellence in every form. No velvet ropes, no exclusion, just an open space where people could gather, eat, and uplift one another without feeling like they had to prove they belonged. Snoop leaned back, the fire in his chest shifting from anger to something else, determination. "We don't beg for a seat at their table," he said, voice firm. "We build our own." Tina grinned, tapping her fingers against the table. "And we make it the hottest ticket in town." By the end of the day, calls had been made, plans had been set in motion. The best black-owned restaurants, caterers, and chefs were already on board, ready to create an event that would be remembered for years. Artists, musicians, and cultural icons were lining up to take part. And the buzz? It was undeniable. Word spread fast. Within days, a table for all was trending. Celebrities, activists, and everyday people rallied behind it. What started as one night of exclusion had transformed into something bigger, something powerful. And when the night of the event finally arrived, the contrast couldn't have been clearer. Eminence Dining sat half empty, its once exclusive air tainted by controversy. Meanwhile, across town, in a beautifully lit outdoor space pulsing with music, laughter, and the aroma of world-class food, Snoop Dogg stood at the heart of something new. He looked around at the packed venue, the community, the culture, the undeniable energy of people celebrating each other. This wasn't about revenge. This was about reclaiming power, rewriting the narrative. Snoop stepped onto the mic, looking out at the crowd. "They tried to tell us we didn't belong," he said, voice steady, full of pride. "But look around. We were never asking for a seat. We were always meant to build the table." And just like that, a movement was born. Experiences, stories of exclusion, of feeling unseen, of being made to feel like they didn't belong in spaces that claimed to be for everyone. The response was overwhelming. This wasn't just about one night, one restaurant, or one celebrity's experience. This was bigger. This was a movement. The phrase "a table for all" became more than just a name. It was a rallying cry, a statement that resonated across communities. Influencers, activists, and public figures started sharing their own stories, using the hashtag. Celebrities who had faced similar treatment stepped forward, pledging their support. Even brands, ones that actually walked the talk, offered sponsorships, wanting to be part of something meaningful. But with the attention came resistance. Not just from Eminence Dining, whose PR team was scrambling to control the narrative, but from the usual corners of the internet where people felt threatened by the idea of marginalized communities creating their own spaces. The pushback was expected. The hate comments, the dismissive headlines calling it an overreaction, the claims that Snoop was playing the race card, it was all part of the script. But this time, the script was changing. One evening, as the final details were falling into place, Snoop sat back, watching the city lights flicker outside his window. His phone was still buzzing nonstop, messages from artists confirming their performances, chefs finalizing their menus, people asking how they could be involved. He exhaled deeply, feeling something he hadn't expected. Pride. This wasn't just a reaction to what had happened to him. This was about everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. This was about taking back the power that had been stripped away, moment by moment, over decades. The night of the event arrived, and the scene was breathtaking. The once empty warehouse had been transformed. Soft lights glowed against exposed brick walls, tables were set with dishes from some of the city's most talented black and brown chefs, and a stage had been built where artists and musicians were preparing to perform. The air buzzed with excitement. This wasn't just a dinner. This was a moment in history. And then, the guests started arriving. Not just celebrities or influencers, but everyday people, families, students, workers, dreamers, people who had been watching this unfold and wanted to be part of it. Snoop walked through the venue, taking it all in. The music, the laughter, the warmth. He saw chefs plating their dishes with pride, artists discussing their work with passion, musicians tuning their instruments, ready to set the night on fire. Tina appeared beside him, nudging his shoulder. "Look around, Snoop. This is it. This is what we're about." He nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yeah. And this is just the beginning." As the night went on, social media exploded with live footage, photos, and reactions. Hashtag #ATableForAll was trending worldwide. News outlets covered the event, not as a controversy, but as a cultural shift. The restaurant that had once denied him a table? Irrelevant. Forgotten. Because this wasn't about getting a seat at their table anymore. It was about building a whole new one. And for the first time in a long time, Snoop knew they had created something that would last. Her speech, and as plates were passed around, the energy in the room only grew stronger. Laughter echoed, glasses clinked together in toasts, and stories were exchanged between people who might have never crossed paths otherwise. The food was more than just a meal, it was history, culture, and resilience served on every plate. Dishes from some of the city's most renowned black and brown chefs reflected flavors from the Caribbean, the American South, West Africa, Latin America, and beyond. Each bite was a reminder that food had always been a means of resistance, a way of preserving culture and identity in a world that often sought to erase them. Snoop moved through the crowd, shaking hands, sharing embraces, and soaking in the love that filled the space. This wasn't a protest. This wasn't a boycott. This was proof. Proof that when a community was denied a seat at one table, they could build their own, bigger, louder, and open to everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. As the night progressed, the performances began. Musicians took to the stage, their voices rich with emotion, filling the warehouse with rhythms that spoke of struggle and triumph. A spoken word poet delivered a piece about her grandfather, who had been refused service at diners in the 1960s, only for his grandson to now be serving food at this historic event. The comedian brought lightness to the room, cracking jokes about the absurdity of exclusion, of the coded language used to keep certain people out of certain spaces. Then, it was Snoop's turn. He stepped onto the stage, the mic feeling familiar in his hands. He let the cheers die down before he spoke, his voice steady, his gaze scanning the faces in the crowd. They tried to shut the door on us. But what they don't realize is, when you lock us out, we don't just stand there waiting. We build. We create. We rise. Applause erupted, but he wasn't done. Tonight isn't about them. It's about us. It's about every person who ever walked into a place and felt eyes on them like they didn't belong. Every kid who was told they had to work twice as hard to be seen as equal. Every family that was turned away, humiliated, just for being who they are. We ain't begging for a seat at their table anymore. Because tonight, we're showing the world we got our own. The warehouse erupted. Cheers, applause, voices lifted in unity. People stood, clapping, some even wiping away tears. Because this wasn't just an event. It wasn't just a dinner. It was a declaration. As the night stretched on, the hashtag #ATableForAll trended worldwide. Clips from the event flooded social media, videos of the performances, images of the stunning dishes, testimonials from guests who had never felt more seen, more valued. Meanwhile, Eminence Dining sat eerily quiet, its Instagram flooded with criticism, its reservations dwindling. They had made their choice, and now the world had made theirs. But Snoop didn't care about that anymore. He wasn't looking back. Because this was only the beginning. Seat certain guests in less visible areas while prioritizing others, while others detailed how complaints about biased treatment were dismissed or ignored. The cracks in the restaurant's carefully curated image widened, and the world was watching. Meanwhile, A Table for All was no longer just an event, it was a movement. The energy of the night didn't fade as the sun rose, it only grew stronger. People wanted more. More spaces like this. More nights where they felt celebrated instead of tolerated. More opportunities to reclaim the power that had been denied to them for too long. Snoop sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through the endless stream of reactions on his phone. Messages poured in from people across the country, chefs wanting to collaborate, community leaders offering support, venues reaching out to host future events. The momentum was undeniable. Tina and Jason arrived a little after noon, their excitement bubbling over. "Bruh," Jason said, shaking his head. "Do you realize what we just did?" Snoop chuckled, setting his phone down. "Oh, I got a pretty good idea." Tina pulled out her laptop, flipping it open. "People aren't just talking about the event, they're asking when the next one is. We've got cities hitting us up, saying they want to host one too." Jason clapped his hands together. "So what's the move? We expanding?" Snoop leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had spent decades in the industry, seen trends come and go, watched people chase moments instead of meaning. But this wasn't just a moment. This was legacy. He looked at Tina and Jason, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face. "We don't stop. We keep going. We take this nationwide. We build something they can't ignore." Tina grinned, already typing. "You thinking pop-ups? Permanent spaces?" Snoop nodded. "Both. We do more events, but we also create real spaces. Restaurants, venues, places where people know they belong the second they walk in." Jason whistled low. "Man, a whole network of black and brown-owned spaces that nobody can deny? That's next level." Snoop met his gaze. "That's the level we're on now." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of it sink in. Then, with renewed energy, they got to work. Because A Table for All wasn't just a response to discrimination. It wasn't just about proving a point to one restaurant. It was a blueprint for the future. And this was just the beginning. Change. And that, more than anything, was what mattered. Snoop exhaled, running a hand over his face as he stared out at the city. The skyline glittered in the distance, unchanged, but he knew something in the air had shifted. What started as a single night of exclusion had transformed into something so much bigger, a movement, a reckoning, a demand for real change. Tina sat down next to him, scrolling through messages. "The momentum isn't dying down, Snoop. People are organizing. More restaurants are being called out. It's like once the dam broke, there was no stopping it." Jason flopped onto the couch with a satisfied grin. "Man, this is bigger than Eminence now. It's bigger than us. You see the community leaders talking about reform? People want real accountability, real equity. And it all started with you saying, 'Nah, we ain't letting this slide.'" Snoop chuckled, shaking his head. "Ain't about me, man. This was always bigger than me. People were just waiting for the right moment. We gave them the push, and now they're taking it further." Tina smiled. "That's what real change looks like." As the days passed, The story of a table for all spread beyond Los Angeles. Other cities reached out, asking how they could bring similar events to their communities. Black-owned restaurants saw a surge in support as people shifted their money toward businesses that valued and respected them. Then, the inevitable happened. A week after the scandal erupted, a new headline hit the news. Eminence Dining closes its doors amid controversy. Snoop read the article, his face unreadable. The restaurant had been bleeding financially, reservations plummeted, investors backed out, and the backlash never let up. Rather than fight the uphill battle, the owner decided to shut down permanently, issuing a final, half-hearted statement about taking time to reflect and rebuild. Jason saw the news pop up on his phone and let out a low whistle. Damn. Just like that. Tina leaned over, reading the statement. Rebuild my ass. They're just trying to disappear quietly. Snoop sighed, setting his phone down. They made their choices. Now they gotta live with them. There was no celebration, no gloating. Just the quiet understanding that this was never about taking down one restaurant. It was about making sure that what happened that night never happened again. And a table for all? It was only just beginning. In the following months, the concept expanded. Snoop, Tina, and Jason worked tirelessly to turn a table for all into a national movement, pop-up events, partnerships with Black and Brown-owned businesses, even plans for permanent spaces where people knew they were always welcome. Celebrities, activists, and community leaders rallied behind it. More restaurants pledged to examine their own biases. More diners sought out establishments that reflected the values of true inclusion. And for Snoop, it was simple. They had been denied a table once. So they built one big enough for everyone. What Snoop Dogg did next will inspire you. When the official announcement came that Eminence Dining would be closing its doors for good, it barely made headlines. The world had already moved on, their focus locked onto something bigger, the movement that Snoop Dogg and his team had ignited. That night, Snoop drove past the now-darkened restaurant. The once bustling, exclusive hotspot stood silent, its windows bare, its facade stripped of prestige. He pulled over, stepping out of his car to take it all in. Jason joined him a few moments later, hands in his pockets, his voice quiet but charged with meaning. Kind of poetic, isn't it? He said. They tried to keep us out, and now there's nothing left to keep anyone out of. Snoop nodded, eyes fixed on the empty building. Yeah. But this ain't about them anymore. It's about what we do next. And he was right. The fall of Eminence Dining was never the goal. The real victory was the movement it had sparked. A table for all, from a protest to a nationwide movement. What started as one night, one dinner, had turned into a national wave of change. People in cities across the country, Chicago, Atlanta, New York, reached out, wanting to host their own A-table for all events. They weren't just asking for guidance. They were ready to take action. Sitting in Snoop's living room, Tina scrolled through an endless flood of messages. Look at this, she said, turning her laptop toward them. People from all over, chefs, community leaders, even teachers, want in. They're asking how to organize, how to bring this to their own cities. Jason leaned over, eyes lighting up. This is it. This is how we take it to the next level. Snoop rubbed his chin, deep in thought. If we're gonna do this, we gotta do it right. Can't just slap our name on something and walk away. We gotta build something real. And so, they did. Tina put together a blueprint, a step-by-step guide to hosting a table for all, covering everything from choosing venues to curating menus with local chefs. Jason tapped into his network to secure funding for underserved communities, making sure these events weren't just for those who could afford to show up. And Snoop? He used his voice, his platform, his influence to amplify the message, making sure the world knew this wasn't just about food. The first expansion, Chicago, Atlanta, New York. The first out-of-state dinner took place in Chicago. The city's rich cultural heritage was on full display, deep dish pizza next to Nigerian suya, Creole gumbo beside Mexican tamales. The venue, once an abandoned factory, had been transformed into a celebration of art, history, and unity. Snoop and Tina flew in, walking into a room buzzing with energy, music, and the unmistakable aroma of soul food. There, they met Malik, a young black chef who had spent years trying to break into the fine dining scene, facing rejection after rejection. Now, at a table for all, he was plating dishes with pride, serving a community that celebrated him. For the first time, Malik told Snoop, shaking his hand, "I feel like I'm not just cooking to survive. I'm cooking for my people." More dinners followed. In Atlanta, a table for all took over a historic black-owned venue, featuring live jazz and spoken-word performances. In New York, the event blended street art with culinary excellence, shining a light on underrepresented artists and chefs. Houston, Miami, the Bay Area, one by one, cities joined in, making the movement their own. The media took notice. News outlets began covering the dinners not as one-off events, but as a cultural shift, a response to exclusion, a celebration of resilience and belonging. Facing the backlash. But not everyone celebrated the movement. Critics accused the table for all of politicizing food and creating division. Conservative commentators dismissed it as a publicity stunt, while some restaurant owners pushed back, not wanting their industry to change. One night, as they prepared for another dinner in LA, Jason shook his head, holding up his phone. "Man, they're saying we're just trying to get attention. That we're making everything about race." Snoop smirked, unbothered. "Let him talk. They don't get it 'cause they don't live it. This ain't for them, it's for the people who've been through it, who know what it's like to be told they don't belong." Tina leaned forward. "And the fact that they're talking about it? That means we're making an impact. They weren't here to change the minds of those who refused to listen. They were here to change the game." 1 year later, the biggest table for all yet. A year after that first dinner, a table for all had grown into something even they hadn't fully imagined. That night, Snoop stood backstage at the biggest event yet, a massive venue in downtown Los Angeles, filled with hundreds of guests. The once small warehouse had now expanded into a space twice the size, twice the impact. Long tables stretched across the room, set with dishes from every culture imaginable. Candles flickered. Murals of black and brown excellence lined the walls. The air was thick with spices, music, laughter, the energy of a movement that had become unstoppable. Tina walked up, clipboard in hand. The room's packed. People flew in from all over for this. Jason appeared with a glass of champagne. "Bruh, you gotta see this crowd. It's bigger than anything we imagined." Snoop took a deep breath, taking it all in. "It ain't about how big it is," he said, voice steady. "It's about what it means." The lights dimmed. The crowd quieted. Snoop stepped onto the stage, the energy in the room electrifying as he took the mic. "A year ago," he began, "we were told we didn't belong. But instead of waiting for someone to give us a seat at their table, we built our own." Applause erupted, rolling through the room like a wave. "This table? It's for all of us. And it's proof that we ain't gotta wait for permission to take up space. We show up. We build. We claim what's ours." The cheers were deafening. The movement was alive. More than a dinner, a legacy. As the event unfolded, music playing, food being shared, stories being told, Snoop moved through the crowd, listening, connecting. At one table, a young man told him how a table for all had inspired him to start his own restaurant. At another, a mother tearfully thanked him for giving her teenage daughter pride in her heritage. By the end of the night, as the last guests departed, Snoop stood at the door, shaking hands, hugging people who had been forever changed by what they had built. When the room was finally empty, Tina and Jason joined him. Tina smiled. "So, what's next?" Snoop grinned. "We keep building. Because a table for all wasn't just a dinner. It was a promise. A promise to keep fighting. To keep creating. And to make sure that everyone, everywhere, always has a seat at the table."